Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive with Books in 10. And don't forget, we're giving away an iPhone when we reach 10,000 subscribers. So make sure you like and subscribe every 3 minutes, and let's get right into it.
Sounds good to me.
We're diving into Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau.
Yeah.
It's a text that has had just a huge impact on how we think about justice and really the role of the individual in society.
It really has.
And it's influenced some pretty major figures throughout history.
Yeah.
You know, like Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi. So we know it's packed with some really powerful ideas.
Absolutely. And I think what's so remarkable is that even though it was published way back in 1849,
Wow.
originally titled Resistance to Civil Government, Thoreau's arguments about our relationship with the government and the power of individual conscience still feels so incredibly relevant today.
They really do. It's amazing.
Yeah.
He just comes out swinging right from the start with this bold statement that government is best, which governs least. I mean, talk about a strong opening, right?
It really is.
It makes you wonder, as you're reading it, like, where do you see this idea playing out in your own life?
Yeah.
Are there areas where you feel like, okay, the government's really helpful here,
Right.
but then other areas where you think like, oh, man, it just feels like they're holding things back?
Totally. And I think that's such a great question to kind of hold in our minds as we dive in.
Absolutely.
And it's important to remember that Thoreau was writing this during a time when the American government was engaged in the Mexican-American War,
Right.
a war that he very much opposed.
Yeah.
He believed that the government was being used as a tool to benefit a select few, not the people it was supposed to represent.
Yeah.
And this is where his famous wooden gun analogy comes in.
Okay, let's unpack this analogy because it's a good one.
It's a great one.
So he compares the government to a wooden gun,
Okay.
visually imposing, right,
Mhm.
maybe even a little intimidating when you first glance at it.
Yeah, you see it hanging on the wall and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
But ultimately useless without the people wielding it.
Exactly. He's highlighting the idea that true power lies within the people.
Right.
And it's a cautionary tale about what happens when we forget that.
Mm-hmm.
When we allow ourselves to be swayed by appearances
Right.
rather than recognizing the true source of authority.
That's a good point.
It really makes you think about, where we might be placing our trust today
Yeah.
and whether we're giving away our power without even realizing it.
It's scary to think about sometimes, right?
It really is.
Like, where are we putting our faith and who are we trusting?
It definitely challenges us to be more aware of those power dynamics, both in the past and in the present.
For sure. And it ties directly into Thoreau's core belief that individual conscience should always come before blind obedience to the law. In fact, he says, and I love this quote, I think that we should be men first and subjects afterward.
Wow.
It really flips the script on how we usually think about, our relationship to authority.
It does. It's like he's urging us to consider, what does it even mean to be a responsible individual?
Yeah.
What are the implications of prioritizing our own moral compass, especially when it conflicts with what the law dictates?
Right.
And how do we actually engage in our communities, hold our leaders accountable without simply just going along with things?
Right.
These are questions that resonate just as strongly today as they did back in Thoreau's time.
Yeah, he was really ahead of his time.
He really was.
So we see that Thoreau is clearly not a fan of blind faith in the government.
Right.
But he also throws some serious shade at another cornerstone of democracy.
Oh, yeah.
Majority rule.
Okay.
He argues that just because something is popular, it doesn't automatically make it right or just...
Right. He's challenging this assumption that the majority always knows best. Like, what happens when the majority is in favor of something that is unjust?
Yeah.
What is the individual's responsibility then?
That's a good question.
And he actually uses the example of slavery to illustrate this point. Imagine, he says, if the majority only voted to abolish slavery when they no longer cared about it one way or another.
Wow.
Like, it didn't matter to them anymore.
That's a pretty jarring thought, right?
It is.
It forces us to think about the limitations of majority rule.
Yeah.
And the importance of individual conviction, even when it goes against the grain.
Absolutely.
And it's not always easy to stand up for what you believe in, right?
It's not.
Especially when you're facing a powerful majority.
No, and that leads us to one of Thoreau's most important points.
Okay.
He's not content with simply critiquing the system.
Right.
He's actually calling for action. He wants people to actively resist.
And that act of defiance landed him in jail for a night.
It did, and that experience in jail is crucial for understanding his philosophy. It wasn't just about making a statement. It was about living his principles even when it meant facing those consequences.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what forms of nonviolent resistance resonate with you.
That's a good question.
Like, what issues are you passionate enough about to actually take a stand?
Right.
Even if it means some sort of personal sacrifice.
Yeah, it's something to think about for sure.
Definitely. And this is where Thoreau really dives into the difference between just like talking about change and actually putting your beliefs into action.
Right.
He's not impressed by people who just sit around and complain about the state of things.
Oh, no.
He even calls them out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He refers to them as children of Washington and Franklin, suggesting that they're kind of riding the coattails of past generations.
Right.
But not actually, like, carrying the torch forward.
Right. So it's not enough to just hold the right opinions. You have to embody them. You have to live them out.
Exactly.
He's challenging us to ask, like, are we all talk and no action?
Totally. And he even compares voting to gambling, where people are more concerned with winning than with the principles at stake.
So how often do we vote just out of habit?
Right.
Or maybe for strategic reasons without really grappling with the deeper issues?
Totally. Are we truly engaged, or are we just going through the motions?
It's tough.
It is.
It's a tough question, but it's one worth asking.
For sure.
And, you know, even voting for the right thing, according to Thoreau, it's not enough.
Right.
He sees it as a very passive action.
Okay.
He wants us to be more proactive, more directly involved in shaping our government and our society.
And that's where his idea of a majority of one comes in.
Okay, I like that, a majority of one.
Yeah, he believes that even a single person acting on their conscience can create this ripple effect that can lead to widespread change.
So he's really emphasizing the power of individual action.
Yes.
Even when it goes against the tide of popular opinion.
Absolutely.
So how do we put this into practice, though?
Right.
What does it actually look like to be a majority of one?
Yeah.
It can't always be easy.
It's not, and he acknowledges that.
Okay.
He actually talks about the potential consequences.
Right.
Imprisonment, loss of property, even being ostracized by your community.
Wow.
He compares the experience of confronting an unjust government to a kind of spiritual death, where you have to sacrifice a part of yourself in order to stay true to your principles.
It's a powerful image.
You know,
You might have to give up some of your comforts, some of your security, to truly live a life of integrity.
and this isn't just theoretical for him.
Right.
He actually experienced this firsthand when he went to jail for refusing to pay his taxes.
Right, and he describes being locked up as this foolishness.
Yeah.
Like highlighting the absurdity of a system that prioritizes physical confinement over intellectual and moral freedom.
Totally. And yet even within those confines,
Yeah?
he finds this sense of liberation. He talks about hearing the sounds of the village for the first time,
Wow.
as if he's like seeing his hometown with fresh eyes.
I love that.
Yeah.
He has this amazing line. If there was a wall of stone between me and my townsmen, there was a still more difficult one to climb or break through before they could get to be as free as I was.
It's like being imprisoned actually opened up this new perspective for him, this deeper understanding of himself and the society he was living in.
So by choosing to disobey, he actually gains this deeper understanding of himself and the society he lives in.
Totally.
He's not just making a point, he's undergoing a personal transformation.
He realizes that true freedom isn't about physical liberation. It's about aligning your actions with your principles.
Powerful stuff.
It really is. And that's what makes his story so compelling. He's not just preaching this, he's living it.
Right. And even though he was released from prison the next day, he talks about how his view of the town, the state, the country had fundamentally changed.
Wow.
It's as if he can't go back to seeing things the way he did before.
He's seen behind the curtain, so to speak. He's realized that the people that he thought he knew, his neighbors, his fellow citizens, are often more concerned with maintaining the status quo than with confronting injustice.
Okay, so where does that leave him? What does he do with this newfound awareness?
Well, he continues to live his life according to his principles.
Okay.
Even though it means being at odds with the prevailing norms of his society, he refuses to pay the poll tax. Not because he's trying to avoid his civic duty, but because he sees it as a form of complicity with a system that he believes is fundamentally unjust.
He states his position very clearly. I simply wish to refuse allegiance to the state, to withdraw, and stand aloof from it effectually.
He's making this conscious decision to disengage from a system that doesn't align with his moral compass.
Wow.
But it's important to note that this isn't like a passive withdrawal.
Okay.
He's not retreating from society altogether.
Right.
He's actively choosing to live in a way that challenges the assumptions and practices of his government. And in doing so, he's not just offering a critique.
Yeah.
He's outlining a path for individual resistance, a way for people to live more authentically and contribute to a more just world.
It's like he's giving us a blueprint.
Totally.
For how to live our values.
Yeah.
Even when it's difficult, even when it means going against the grain.
Exactly. And that's what makes civil disobedience so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just a theoretical treatise on government.
Right.
It's a call to action, an invitation to engage with the world in a more conscious and deliberate way.
So what does this all mean for us today? How can we apply Thoreau's ideas in our own lives? Yeah, it feels like Thoreau is urging us to be active participants, not just, passive bystanders.
Totally.
Especially when it comes to these issues of justice.
Right.
He wants us to constantly question the status quo.
Yeah.
Even, or perhaps especially in a democracy, where we might think, oh, well, my vote is enough.
Right, exactly. He reminds us that voting is only one part of the equation. It's so easy to fall into complacency.
Right.
To just go along with things, even when we know deep down that they're wrong.
Yeah, it's easy to just go with the flow sometimes.
It really is. And Thoreau is really pushing us to consider the limits of obedience. Like, when do we actually have a duty to obey the law?
Yeah.
And when do we have a duty to resist it?
That's a tough question.
It's the essential tension that he's exploring in this essay.
So he's not advocating for complete anarchy.
No.
But he's definitely not advocating for blind obedience either.
Not at all.
It's like he's walking this tightrope between respecting the rule of law,
right,
but also staying true to your own moral compass.
Yeah, finding that balance is not easy.
It's not. And he gives us this really powerful image to illustrate this point.
Okay.
He says, if 1,000 men were not to pay their tax bills this year, that would not be a violent and bloody measure as it would be to pay them and enable the state to commit violence and shed innocent blood.
Wow.
It really makes you think about the implications of our everyday actions.
It does.
Even something as mundane as paying taxes can become complicit in a system that perpetuates injustice.
Totally. It forces us to examine whether we're really living our values or just going through the motions.
Yeah, just checking the boxes.
Exactly. And it's not just about taxes, right? It's about every choice we make, every action we take, every word we speak.
Wow.
Are we contributing to a more just world? Or are we simply perpetuating the status quo even when we disagree with it? Thoreau doesn't let us off the hook with easy answers.
He really holds our feet to the fire.
He does.
And then he leaves us with this really haunting image. He says, through this wound, a man's real manhood and immortality flow out, and he bleeds to an everlasting death. I see this blood flowing now.
It's like he's saying that failing to act on your conscience is a kind of spiritual suicide.
Wow.
It's such a powerful metaphor for the consequences of moral compromise.
Yeah.
He's arguing that a life worth living is one that aligns with your deepest values, even if that means challenging the norms of your society, even if that means personal sacrifice.
It all circles back to one of the most striking questions in the essay.
Okay.
Where he asks, how can a man be satisfied to entertain an opinion merely and enjoy it? Is there any enjoyment in it if his opinion is that he is being wronged?
Yeah.
He's urging us to move beyond just passive observation into active engagement.
Yeah.
Knowledge without action is ultimately meaningless.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into civil disobedience, I want to leave you with this challenge. How can knowing about Thoreau's ideas empower you to act differently?
Yeah.
What injustices do you see in the world?
It's a good question.
And what are you willing to do about them?
Thoreau reminds us that we all have a role to play in creating a more just world.
Yeah.
It's not about blind obedience or passive acceptance.
Yep.
It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it's unpopular.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into civil disobedience.
Of course.
And don't forget to like and subscribe every 3 minutes.